on making one thing perfectly clear. Donald Trump has my strong endorsement, period.
My fellow Republicans, let's send Joe Biden back to his basement and let's send Donald Trump back to the White House.
My fellow Americans, the only way to make America wealthy and safe and strong again is to make Donald J. Trump our president again.
Night 2 of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee featured a parade of one-time critics of former President Trump. Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and Marco Rubio all taking the stage and endorsing Trump's return to the presidency. The Hill White House columnist Niall Stanage joins us to discuss. Now, we've all come to expect politicians to change their tune as political winds shift, but it is jarring to see someone like Nikki Haley essentially bending the knee after everything she said about Trump in the campaign. What's your take?
Yeah, I think that's true. I do think that this does maybe fuel public cynicism to a certain degree. Yeah, I mean, of course, people understand that a primary process involves people with different views of their party. You go forward as a candidate because you think you're the best person. Everyone gets that. But I think there is an element of cynicism when people do complete U-turns from having at one stage maybe suggested a certain candidate was dangerous or unfit for office or just, unacceptable. And then they end up endorsing that candidate for the presidency just a few months later.
Let's talk about Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance. There's a sense that he can provide a certain intellectual backbone for the MAGA movement and sell it in places like the Midwest. What impact do you think he'll have on the Trump campaign?
I think the second part there, the Midwest, is probably the more important one. I've always been a little bit skeptical of the purportedly intellectual element of that point. But in relation to the Midwest, I mean, obviously J.D. Vance, the senator representing Ohio, there are some demographic similarities, at least, between states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, to a degree, Michigan. Yes, I know there's local rivalries as well, but the J.D. Vance brand is about the sort of the heartland, marginalized people, particularly in rural communities. That is a constituency that hasn't really been terribly well served by the political class generally in DC. So Senator Vance has some capacity, I think, to appeal to those people.
Over on the Democratic side, lots of hand-wringing over the path forward. Many in the party are convinced President Biden can't win. Swing state polls continue to show Trump in the lead, but Biden says he won't step down. How would you describe the current state of the Democratic Party?
In crisis, I think, still. I mean, the crisis may have softened slightly because I think it was perceived as difficult to make a push against an incumbent president in the immediate aftermath of the shooting at the Trump rally on Saturday, just because that changed the atmosphere. But it hasn't made dissenting Democrats any more accepting of President Biden's candidacy. And I think there is a real difficulty there. There are real questions as to whether he will go forward as the candidate still.
There's a battle brewing inside the Democratic Party over when to officially nominate President Biden as the party's presidential candidate. DNC officials are talking about a virtual vote to seal the nomination as soon as the end of the month. Tell us about the pushback against that from others in the party.
Yeah, that's right, Drew. There's a letter circulating among House Democrats pushing back pretty strenuously against this effort. To make a long story short, people are worried that this attempt to move forward a roll call vote is really an attempt to suppress dissent within the party and to try to ensure President Biden's renomination and to try to limit the time that his critics have to work with. Now, people who want the roll call vote are arguing on the basis of a particular law in Ohio that at one point suggested a nominee would have to be named early, but it seems like Ohio has changed that ruling. So now it's a very mixed situation, but certainly some dissatisfaction about the attempt to get Biden officially nominated at an earlier stage than the convention.
With that being said, at this point in time, what do you think are the chances that Biden gets replaced?
I think they have possibly diminished very slightly over the past few days. I think the momentum of the Biden critics has been blunted a little bit. But there's still enormous dissatisfaction. Democrats can still read the polls, which are pretty negative from President Biden's perspective. And there are some suggestions that very influential Democrats, including former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, are still unreconciled to President Biden going forward as the nominee. So he's clearly still in danger. I just think he's in slightly less danger than he was maybe a week ago.
You wrote about the 4 biggest challenges Biden is facing as he seeks re-election: his age, the situation in battleground states, the ramifications of the assassination attempt on former President Trump, and discontent among the Democratic base over the situation in Gaza. What would Biden have to do to turn that around?
He'd have to do a lot to turn that around, and one of the things he'd have to do can't be done, which is become a younger person than he actually is. I mean, his age and his rather halting performances recently have obviously caused an enormous amount of stress to Democrats and a distress to Democrats who think he's on course to lose the election. Just to take the final point that you mentioned, Drew, the Gaza point, that is, of course, about to come back into focus very soon because Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is due here in Washington to address a joint session of Congress on July 24th. So even though that issue has been superseded over the past couple of weeks, it's about to come back front and center.
New details are emerging on how a gunman was able to get close enough to shoot former President Trump. One of the major remaining questions is, how was the roof of the building that the shooter shot from not properly guarded? What are we learning?
Yeah, that is a really huge question, and I think so far the explanations offered by the Secret Service have not satisfied many people, maybe hasn't satisfied anyone. One of the issues, or one of the rationales being put forward, is that Secret Service personnel couldn't have been stationed on top of that roof because it's a sloping roof. That explanation, I think, has received widespread mockery, if not disdain. And so there is clearly a lot of questions for Secret Service to answer here in relation to that point and in relation to the general picture where this shooter was able to get these shots off from a comparatively close range against former President Trump.
All right, that's all I got. Niall, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Elon Musk has announced he will move the headquarters of SpaceX and his social media company X to Texas in response to a new California law. The tech billionaire made the announcement after Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill into law this week banning school districts from outing students or requiring parents to be notified if their child decides to change their gender identity or pronouns. Newsom quickly responded on social media, posting a screenshot from a 2022 post of former President Trump criticizing the billionaire. Musk says the new forced outing ban was the final straw and is the reason he will be moving headquarters for both companies to Texas. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.